Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, The Cactus Eaters: How I Lost My Mind and Almost Found Myself on the Pacific Crest Trail. I bought this at Coas Books for $6, and what appealed to me was that it was about the Pacific Crest Trail, and I am a big fan of these long trails. I know on this channel I've covered Listening for Coyote, a book about a travel east-west in Oregon. I've talked about The Man Who Walked Through Time, which was, at the time, the length of the Grand Canyon National Park. What I really appreciated about those kinds of books is that the person really explores what it means to be on that trail before, during, and after the hike. The Cactus Eaters is not that, however. So, I paid $6 for it, and I think it wasn't money well spent per se. I enjoyed the book while reading it to a degree, and having read all 400-ish pages, I felt like the $6 were alright. But I would have preferred to spend those $6 on another kind of book. One about the Pacific Crest Trail, probably, but one done responsibly. A cool thing about this book is that it also comes with a Meet the Author section about the book, which has a section titled The Pacific Crest Trail Association and the Future of the PCT, and then a section called Read On, which includes further readings, some questions with the author, a essay, Living the Pacific Crest Trail, a profile of Scott Williamson. It's an interesting section. I like when I get to get a bit more insight into the author's perspective on things. The book was published in 2008. This is a first edition HarperCollins Publishers version. I don't know if that means it's first edition overall or if it just means first edition for this publisher. The Cactus Eaters is one of those books kind of like Into the Wild or A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. It's one of those books where someone isn't really prepared for the thing that they're about to do, and then their work or their foolishness becomes published. It's popular for all the wrong reasons and almost certainly not popular within the actual community of people that are interested in the subject matter. So, The Cactus Eaters is about Dan White, who hears about the Pacific Crest Trail. He feels that as a 26-year-old with a pretty active life and lifestyle and girlfriend who is also physically active and capable, he hears about the Pacific Crest Trail and manages to convince her to join him on it, which is the kind of setup I really hate. It does frame it as a personal journey to a degree, but it requires a certain self-awareness, because anyone going into that setup, anyone, like if this were about the Appalachian Trail, anyone who's done the AT or section hiked it or anything like that, immediately they know what's coming. There's a breakup in this story. And the reason for that breakup is because of very preventable issues. Early into the hike in the Mojave Desert, I think it's either like the first or second day, Dan White insists he doesn't need his girlfriend to navigate, and she insists that they're lost. And he goes back and forth, and it's almost an argument, and then sure enough, she ends up getting the compass, getting the map, and navigating. Oh, we're just 10 minutes east, we took a wrong turn or something like that. Okay, so they get back on it, and she gets him out of that situation. And the resolution to that chapter is, I'm going to need to find a way to get us out of a bad situation that you got us into, which is competitive. And it's not good for a relationship that he feels like he got them into that terrible situation and she needed to rescue him. That instead of having a nice moment coming together about it, he says, well, I need to do something in the reverse. Later on, they end up being dubbed the Lois and Clark Expedition, a trail name for the two of them, by a passerby who spends some time with them, and he stays for a couple days and then they move on. And rebranding it the Lois and Clark Expedition, not the Lewis and Clark, but Lois and Clark Expedition, really puts a grandiose feeling in their minds about this hike. Well, one of them is still holding on to a chip on his shoulder, and it becomes a gouge on his shoulder, a growing and festering insecurity. At one point, he talks about how it's possible to eat 6,000 calories on the trail and still lose weight. And so he talks about how getting to a trail town, you see people on the Appalachian Trail, on the Pacific Crest Trail, when they get to a town, they just engorge themselves. 4 hamburgers, 4 Big Macs, 5 large fries, and 2 gallons of soda kind of things. And so he and his girlfriend are at a diner and are picking out on food, and they see someone kind of picking at his food inattentively. The narrator recognizes this guy as another Pacific Crest Trail hiker. And it turns out that this hiker had heard about them. He's been having some morale issues, some dehydration issues. And Dan White, in his mind, is thinking, he's going to want to hike with us. We can't let him. His morale issues are going to drag us down. And it's this defeatist attitude, that pessimistic attitude of the narrators, that keeps on getting into the hike. And it's one of those things, he clearly is not mentally prepared, even if he's physically prepared for this, which he isn't, or emotionally prepared for this kind of endeavor with his girlfriend, which he isn't. He's not mentally prepared. He doesn't have a good mindset for keeping morale high. And so he keeps on trying to dodge this hiker every way he can. Oh, I'll just follow you to the motel and get a room there. Oh, I'll leave, crack of dawn is easy. I'm usually up before the sunrise anyway. Dan White keeps on trying to find these excuses. Oh, well, we're very slow. Well, I've been... And the guy replies back with some way to try and get with them as a trio. Everything Dan White tries in vain is countered. And eventually you get to the moment on the trail where they're still in the desert, the first, I think it's 80 or 100 miles, which really shows how poor of a condition these two hikers are in, that the first 100 miles are kicking their asses so hard, and Dan White is carrying the water, and he feels like it's weighing down on him too hard, like they have too much water. And so what he does is he pours out a couple quarts of water, which he very clearly needs in the desert. He says, oh, we've still got, a gallon and a half between the two of us for 16 miles. That's not enough for 16 miles in the desert. But he's poured it out, and he can't unpour out that water. They end up dehydrated about 12 miles later. He starts getting delirious, and eventually his girlfriend says that, if it really comes down to it, like healthy prickly pear have a lot of water in them. He starts, at the next Packs Off break, he starts eating cacti, and she forgot to mention to him that you're supposed to take the needles out. You can't just eat it fresh, you have to pick the needles out of it. So he ends up with needles all over his tongue. He's in a bad mood. He, as a narrator, is talking about how his girlfriend's supposed to be the calm one and he's supposed to be the delirious one. And in that moment, she's not the calm one. She's exasperated. And she's exasperated because of the antics of this author who is trying to sabotage this hike in every way he can. And he has just barely enough self-awareness that you realize him looking back at it, he hates these actions that he's done. But it's hard to read through because he's just doing these things that are self-sabotaging. And then he says, 5 minutes down the trail is a spring with perfect water that they could have restocked on, and they do. That he didn't need to eat these prickly pear. He didn't. It's just infuriating, the kinds of things he gets up to. The book, this hike, takes a turn. Eventually, it's a shipwreck. They're still together, but they can't finish it in one season like they had intended. So what they do is, in Northern California, they decide we're going to salvage it, we're going to find a place to stay, and in June, when the snow has melted, we're going to continue the hike again, turning it into a section hike. But it just doesn't work. The fantasy, the mysticism of this trail is lost as soon as they give up that 1 year. They should have called it quits and said, we tried, we did some really amazing things, and we kind of came together. But they don't. And that stubbornness gets to their relationship. They end up splitting up because of it. He ends up trying to complete it anyway. He's got injuries. He's got torn ligaments or something like that. He's got an injury in his leg. He insists, I've just got to do this. Allison, his girlfriend, has already given up. She has already called it quits because she can't keep up with this stubbornness. The reason this book is so hard to read is because the author is so self-aware of how self-sabotaging he is. But he tells his story faithfully. There's an extended section, maybe 50 to 70 pages near the end, after he's finished the hike, where he's trying to talk about how it's going with Allison, his girlfriend, and eventually the whole ordeal just wore both of them down. She can't continue the relationship, and he accepts it. It's over. He has a hard time moving on, as anyone would after a long-term relationship. But it's this hardship that he put them through. He kept on instigating her or doing things incorrectly, such that the only logical conclusion was this person is not fit to be around. That is an important part of his life, his memoir, that he is trying to express in this book. I just really hate it because it's one of those stories that he does everything wrong and still comes out on top. He really shouldn't have done half of this. He was a child playing at being an adult, 26 years old, and I've been 26, and I remember what it was like. I never did anything that stupid. I did one or two things and then immediately turned my life around. I am the problem in my life. I need to fix it. He does multiple actions in this book where he should have just realized, I need to turn myself around, and he doesn't in that moment, and it's just really hard to read because of that. This is one of those books I did not like just because of how hard it is to read through it. It's just failure after failure after failure, and it's not representative of the Pacific Crest Trail, and it's not representative of long-distance hikes. It's representative of an immature person trying to convince himself and his significant other that he can do something when he's not in a good place to do so. The Cactus Eaters is one of those books I really feel like I could put back into the system because it's not good. The Man Who Walked Through Time, he has struggles, not because he didn't do his research or because he didn't get into the right frame of mind, but because of things he couldn't have expected. In the one moment, he talks about, like, he's trying to wave down an airplane for his supplies. He's using fire. He has this kind of sleeping bag, a reflective color, and then it turns out the thing that does get the attention of the plane is the white sheet that he's waving around, because the orange of the sleeping bag doesn't stand out from the red of the area. So it's not like he's self-sabotaging in that situation. It's just a situation he didn't realize would be a problem, and he ends up getting out of it and living to tell the tale. The author of The Man Who Walked Through Time is not like Dan White. He prepared himself. He spoke with people, resources, guides on how to do this. The Cactus Eaters, it's not that kind of story. I really did not like this book because of all of those issues that he gets himself into. It's an okay book, but do not go into this expecting a representative story of the Pacific Crest Trail or long distance hikes in general. So yeah, those are my thoughts on this book. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.